because I recorded it locally and I got actually less good options than recording to the cloud.
Yeah.
So we're good. We don't go live for another couple minutes.
Okay. I'm trying to figure out how to. I'll just look at Brian's posts. Oh, it's probably better if I share my own post.
Let's see.
I should have posted this earlier this week, but I didn't think about it. Sorry.
No worries.
Yep.
Okay. Shared.
So cool. Going live in 2 minutes. Got your event here. This feels really fun talking to people because I'm now just getting to the point where I'm actually like hiring contractors and talking to people. It's like, oh, okay, because I know my company and where it is. But then people are asking like things like, oh, what's your policy and position and rules for how employees are doing? I'm like, dude, we just started contracting like a week ago. If like this is real basic stuff, like that what we have. But Daniel asked some good questions like, oh, that's really great. And if you asked me a year from now, I'm sure I'd have a really clever answer for you. But right now, I'm kind of just sitting here with my thumb up my ass. So we're just going to kind of wing it.
Mm-hmm. What's the attendance look like on these things usually? Like 10, 20 people, 50 people?
That's a lot more than we usually get. This is more for this will be more for like content that we make out of it later. Is
Yep.
generally it. We do it live just because why not? It's also then you don't have to upload video until
Mm-hmm.
it's edited, which is cool. So we'll see.
Yeah, our main strategy for oh, actually, let me go live here. All right. And 3, 2, 1. All righty, and we are live, folks. Thank you very much for showing up today. As usual, you got my co-founder Garrett Daly and myself, Brian Schuster. But today we are very lucky to have Clark Deaver with us and his experience with startups. Your experience is actually quite vast, Clark. Riley's are very specific, so I'll let you give your own introduction. I feel you do a better job than I would.
All right. Yeah, so I spent probably the last decade, well, the last 2 years I've been in Austin, but the decade prior to that, I was in Buffalo, New York, and I was just focused on building kind of the economic future of that community through venture capital and teaching folks in kind of a Rust Belt city inside the US how they could raise initial capital and how to play, build companies that generate outsized returns for like where they started. It really came down to after college, um, Buffalo was just in such a sad state economically, and I was trying to figure out how could I find leverage to make that region more successful for my kids, my friends' kids, and have like a bright economic future. Funny story, just a little Buffalo plug. In 1903, Buffalo had more millionaires per capita than any other city in the world, right? So it's thought of by our generation as being this kind of like downtrodden former steel mill type of place. But because it was the port at which everything from the Midwest had to go through in order to get to Europe, they just kind of had attacks there, and that led to tremendous economic wealth. And those were raw materials, but they started kind of vertically integrating and doing all sorts of manufacturing in Buffalo, and that led to the initial wealth generation in the city. So, point being, there was a historical precedent that
Oh yeah.
you
In the
can do
Midwest
this.
has the same exact thing, right? Detroit, Milwaukee, Gary, Indiana.
Yep.
It's kind of a punchline these days, but it's like, hey, those were actual thriving cities at one point, especially in the Midwest. It was the auto manufacturing, right, that really blew it up. But yeah, no, but then again, that was 70 years ago. Now
Yeah.
we're in today.
So the so I'm sitting there and I'm looking at the opportunities in front of me, and it's like, how do I, as you know, I grew up poor to middle class, depending on, what year it was. And how am I able to create any kind of economic change or lift? And, the idea is like you have to find leverage. And the only way that someone from that kind of background finds leverage, with the economic tools that were available at the day were like uh, through real estate, right? Because then you can put partial down, put in some sweat equity, sell it, and go through this cycle of making money on the whole thing, even though you're only in for whatever you put down payment. And there was a lot of people doing that, but I didn't think that that generated like a lot of value for the city and that like, okay, new housing, better housing, et cetera. But um, it wasn't going to lift the economic prospects because good housing without any jobs just becomes rundown housing because no one can afford it. And so the other opportunity really for a large scalable business was venture-backed businesses. And we started this group. Some friends of mine started it, and I joined real early. It was called Buffalo Open Coffee Club, and it was based on Brad Feld's book, Startup Communities, because Brad had worked in Boulder to take a little nothing community and make it like the third most vibrant startup community in the US behind San Francisco and New York. And so he had this model, this playbook, and a bunch of us had read that book. And so we just started kind of executing against it. And the first thing was create a place for everyone to socialize. So in Austin, we have, Fiesta. I don't know if there's an open coffee club here, but we created this open coffee club. And literally at the beginning, it was just guys talking about Twitter and Facebook and Yahoo, like maybe they'll open up a branch office here and we can go work for, one of
What
these
year is this
startups.
that we're talking, Clark?
2009, 2010.
Okay.
And that's kind of one of Brad's points in startup communities is that it takes a decade, it takes 20 years to build a thing, right? And you have to recommit to that 20-year action every day. And so, when we first started, we were all just hoping to get jobs. And then over a couple of years, it just became apparent to us that like no one was coming to save us, right? And at that point, we realized that we just had to kind of lift ourselves by our bootstraps and go. And many of those folks that were in that early open coffee club went on to found the first startups in Buffalo. And some of them founded the first unicorn in Buffalo, right? So we have ACV auctions. It IPO'd for like $4 billion. And a lot of my friends that we used to sit around having coffee and like we used to help each other with gig work and just doing, tech stuff when it was cool. Um, they were the team that got that over the finish line. I wasn't a part of that. I had founded my own hardware startup. We ran out of cash, but I learned a lot of lessons along the way. So it's kind of funny. I've It's left me with like a little bit of a chip on my shoulders in some way because a lot of my friends had this very successful exit. But I've just kept building new ideas and really, it's like those who can't do teach. I find a lot of joy in mentoring people and advising companies and helping them cross that chasm,
All
which
right.
is part of the reason you brought me here today.
And actually, yeah. So thank you for the background. The specific reason I brought you in was based on a discussion we had with you in Austin
I'm here.
about must have been a month ago or so, where we were talking about funding and that
Yep.
structure. And like again, one of the things that in the last few years in particular, it's been very, very hard to raise, right? And it's one of those things where like there's not a lot of great education trying to explain to founders like what are the actual things you should do to get funded when you don't have all the pieces in place, right? Like I feel like a lot of the education kind of has these prerequisites kind of sitting there of, oh, you should have it. Like they don't necessarily address it, but they say, well, you should have this and you should have this and you should have this. But then sometimes founders come in where it's like, hey, they weren't expecting to need to raise funds. And now all of a sudden they're in a situation where they have to, right?
Mhm.
Or maybe they fucked up truly and they just didn't do a lot of the work, but it's like, well, I still need to raise something because I'm about to lose money in 3 months. What do I actually do? And what I found about your advice is yours was very actionable, very street like so, something that even if I'm in that situation, I can actually start to make progress towards the right thing. Or at the very least, you've seen so many of them that you kind of know how these things go. So really what I wanted to talk about is that seed, pre-seed, early stage. I'm a founder and I want to raise funds. and I don't necessarily know how to do it, or maybe I have done it, but it hasn't been repeatable, right? What do I do to actually go and raise? That's kind of what I want today's discussion to be about.
Sure, sure. Yeah, again, so just the expertise that I have. So this is the first thing I tell founders when I meet them is like bias the advice you get by the track record of the person giving it, right? So I'm very clear in like there's lots of ways to do this. My experience is working in second and third tier cities with maybe first time founders. If I'm lucky, sometimes they're second time founders. And how do we cross that chasm from like I have an idea to I have a little bit of maybe I have problem solution fit, maybe I have a prototype. You know, how do I take it to the next level where we can start to honestly just get to the point where we'd be interesting to a VC? I think that there's this big misunderstanding if you haven't gone through the fundraising process before of like what is actually investable. And that answer changes depending on where in the world you are, what geography you are. Even though now you have things like Angel List and you have this global angel and VC accessibility, um, it's a double-edged sword, right? Because they're seeing better deals, better deal flow, you know, where it used to be an angel only invests in maybe a 3 to 6 hour drive from where they live because they want to be able to go help, or they want to be able to show up, they want to be able to talk to the founder, they want to be able to talk with their network about that person's background. So prior to
Very
COVID,
prevalent in the Southeast. Like I know in
yeah,
Atlanta and in North Carolina, they will only, lots will only invest in this area.
yeah, so it's a much more regional mindset, especially prior to COVID. COVID kind of changed the game because people still had capital to deploy, but now they realized they could do it digitally, and you know, and then you have these other things like all the um equity crowdfunding or like equity, yeah, equity crowdfunding, whatever, Reg D, whatever they call it. Those are different too, right? And so they provide another pathway for folks who don't maybe follow the kind of traditional VC uh, background where it's like, oh, I went to Stanford and I learned some stuff and I got ingrained in like the Silicon Valley network. You know, I know some people on Sand Hill Road and I can get that capital raise going. So anyways, that's just to kind of like contextualize, right? So this is for the others that want to make the moves. Um, I think the first thing to really understand is that ideas are super cheap. You know, like no one cares about your idea. You should basically be screaming your idea from the no one cares and no one's going to steal it because even if they steal it, like they're going to end up morphing it into something that is not what you're trying to build anyways, because they're going to believe that their ideas are better or they learned some insight that you don't have. And so rarely, like even if I gave two founders the same concept, the same target market and like let them loose, the chances of them actually being competitors after like 12 or 18, 24 months is probably almost zero. And so the thing that I always recommend to founders is just like go out and start meeting people. And from like the moment you decide you're going to be building a company, you need to start having a CRM, right? And this could take any form you want. It could be an Excel spreadsheet, but I meet with Garrett. He goes in my list, email, phone number, you know, when I met with him. And then one, you know, in a routine basis, I start looking at like who have I talked to lately because I need to build and keep those communications alive. I think one of the biggest failure modes I see with first-time founders is they start raising capital when they need capital, and like that's way too late.
Yeah,
Um,
that's
That was actually one of the specific mistakes that I learned the first time was we should have started 6 months beforehand, you know?
yeah,
and it's interesting. I had an equity expert, right, or at least a funding expert, right? He doesn't do only VC, but he talks about that. But that is like the most consistent advice I've seen from folks like that and other founders, which is, hey, you kind of need to start like 6 months before you start,
yeah,
right? Because also like and this is something where when you think of go-to-market strategy, right? Where it's like, yes, there is such a thing as cold messaging. I do it, it works, but the numbers for cold messaging are way more shit than the messages for warm messaging, right? Like my hit rate for cold messaging on a really, really good day is I'll send out, let's say 50 messages on LinkedIn, which is higher than most others. And like if I get 2 to 3 meetings out of that, that is a phenomenal week. That's really great, right? However, for investors, like if you're going to reach out, but if I'm doing warm, I may get closer to 25%, right? To be able to do that, which means I need less folks to do that. But the problem is that if you're selling and you know I'm selling, the chance of them saying yes just shrinks down considerably. It's an order of magnitude difference.
Well, one thing I would say, Brian, is uh, when you're selling equity in your company, that's a lot different than selling product. So
This is very true.
even if you can do cold messaging, um, the people who respond to cold messaging are probably not the angels and VCs that you want to be dealing with, period. Right? Like raising capital from someone is roughly equivalent to getting into a marriage. You are going like statistically, if you win, if you take it the distance to acquisition or IPO, statistically, you will have been in that relationship longer than you will be in a relationship with your wife if you got married today. Like it takes, on average, at this point, 6 to 10 years to exit, and the average marriage in the U.S. is like 2 or 3 years. So, so like having that understanding, you really want to be selective of who you're raising capital from. You want to know who they are. You want to know how they react to good news, to bad news, to all of these things. And that is so there's yeah, you need to start 6 months ago, but a lot of that is like the dating and engagement process to figure out if you want to work with these folks. Because from a founder perspective only, like I'm very founder focused. Like I'm an angel investor. I have a lot of VC friends, but when I give advice, I'm talking to founders, and I say things that upset my VC friends, but this is the truth that I'm trying to share. And like maybe I'm leaning too hard one way or another, but I've picked my team. I'll just put it
Nah,
that
I
way.
mean, Garrett and I have crossed the Rubicon on this. We're very, very pro-founder to the faults that being pro-founder means, right? But actually, it's funny. I actually got to see this up front on like Horizons, right, or whatever. It's because like my family's business was invested in, I believe, in 2008 and 2009. I remember when that happened. It was like, oh, it's a 5 to 7 year horizon, right? That's what they said, 5 to 7 years, and we're gonna do the thing. We're gonna invest, and we're gonna exit, and we're all gonna be happy after 5 to 7 years. The actual timeline from that is that they started in 2008. We did not get an exit until 2022.
Yep.
So we over doubled the time horizon, and that's how it is. Because that's the thing. Like I think a lot of people like need to hear that, be like, oh, it's only a 5 year thing, right? To do that to get people to just sign fucking checks and get it out there. And I don't think that's true. I don't think I haven't seen that play out usually. Very rarely does it play out that
I
way.
mean, there's some shifts. Again, it's very industry specific, it's geographic specific, it's idea specific, but uh, you know, people startups stopped IPOing pretty much because you have to be on the level of like Uber or something like that as like a household name brand in order to get enough volume when you IPO to not just like lose a ton of money and just give a bunch of money to investment makers and not be able to actually raise that much capital out of the deal. So, that's why you saw the SPACs and now we're seeing these direct public offerings, DPOs. Time will tell, right? But the IPO dream, kind of ended in the .com era. For most folks. Now most exits you would see like an acquisition.
Right.
Because in any industry, there's been huge roll-ups. There's giant conglomerates. Like we live in this very corporate controlled economy inside the U.S. And if you start to get like most large companies, like industry leaders, if you started to take 1, 2, 3% market share from them, if they catch it early enough, they're going to give you an offer that you don't refuse as a founder, just so they can shelf it, just so they could not face you as a competitor in 5 years when you're big enough to do them harm. And like that's a very well known playbook. So those are the kind of acquisitions you see sometimes. Especially in like the defense sector per se, or Cisco's famous for doing it in network hardware, right? If you built any kind of networking hardware and you took a point or two, that's
Mhm.
the trigger for their M&A team to be like, okay, let's talk. So I think that so let's go back to the fundraising, right? Because we're getting kind of we're looking at the end first. I just
Right.
wanted to make the point that the relationships are very important, and that's what this whole fundraising game is about. It's about
Well,
relationships.
actually, I kind of want to pause before you go back to that because
Yeah.
that's something that's really interesting. Because okay, we are all saying this right now. You should be building relationships early. Because the point I made about like, particularly the because I've looked into cold messaging. I've even talked to founders who have done cold messaging to try to find investors, and like legitimately, they gave it an honest effort. They did the volume and did that and said, waste of time, don't do that. It's all based on relationship. So we're saying it's relationships. And there's at some point, somebody's going to read this who is going to want to raise money knowing, oh, I need to start like 12 months to 6 months earlier than I expect to raise to do this, or whatever time frame, or I should start building a relationship. And they're not going to fucking do it. Clark, in your experience, why aren't they doing it? Why are they not taking the advice you're giving them when, in fact, you've seen this and you know it and you've seen this play out?
If they're a first-time founder, it's probably because they're excited about building the product. Second-time founders focus more on distribution, and distribution is a game of relationships as well, right? And so those games both align. Also, second-time founders have raised capital in theory, at least once, and so they tend to learn lessons over time. Um, I also think that it's just when you're a founder, you're doing so many different things that you literally have to time box. You have to come up with, okay, here is I have 60, 80 hours in a week that I could be working, because I need to sleep and eat and work out. What percentage am I putting towards product? What percentage am I putting towards marketing? What part am I putting towards sales? What am I putting towards all the operations overhead of finance, accounting, hiring, etc. And then what am I putting towards fundraising? Because the truth is, fundraising never stops. Once you decide that you are going the angel VC path, which I mean, there's a whole discussion in there whether my personal belief at this point is that 95% of startups should not be raising VC at this point. Like the only thing that VC makes sense for, and again, this is a very opinionated piece, is that only thing that VC makes sense for at this point is like deep tech, space tech, maybe defense tech. Like unless you're building hardware, or there's big regulatory hurdles that you have to cross the chasm through, like those, biotech things like that. Like to get through FDA, it's $50 million table stakes just to get to the point where you can actually
And,
test and market. So
and what do you know? You just described all of our clients,
yeah,
right? That's who's raising.
but all the folks that are watching this who are building SaaS apps, like don't like just don't raise. Like maybe go raise angel capital, and that's where like hopefully we'll dive into that a little bit. But I even that is kind of I would advertise it thusly. Like I wouldn't. I would say like I'm not planning on raising VC. Here's the terms I'm offering. To angels, and I would drive at it. And if it doesn't show up, then give the angels their money back and try again with a different idea. Because I just think the AI has shifted the game so much that if you can focus on automation of stuff and then just the force multiplying effect of using AI, even if you're a software developer, you just don't need the headcount you used to need. And there's just a lot of things that you can shrink and instead target a niche. I think we talked about this at dinner, but again, I have friends who are unicorn founders, and I've asked them, okay, if you could go back and like ride that train again, or the other option is you go build a SaaS platform that does $5 million ARR, with like a 80% chance of success, what do you take? And you get to build it with like your four closest friends as opposed to 1,000 employees. And like all of them are like 5 million ARR all day, every day, right? Like less money, less problems, less employees, more focus. I get to stay close to the product. I get to be more responsive. It's just more fun. It's a better trip. I mean, there's a certain amount of people that want to try and get the high score. They want to try and beat Bezos and Musk, but like, if you're just trying to change your life and like maybe even create generational wealth for your family, like just niches in a global marketplace, boom. Like don't even
Uh,
worry about trying to build some crazy horizontal platform. Just take a horizontal platform and build a little vertical along it, or compete with one of the big horizontals by like knowing your customer better and building custom software that just does that one little thing
there
for them.
just seems to be such a disconnect though with that on here, and I know we're kind of going along, but screw it. This is our office hours. This is why we do this. Is that the type of, because that's the thing, that's where I've gotten finally in my life, my career, where it's like it's fun to build smaller things. Actually for me, it's like I'm not sure if I necessarily want to build a smaller, more niche thing. I know I don't want to build a big thing. Like I know that's the thing. I've seen what that takes. I've seen what that requires, and to me it looks like a devil's bargain, right? In the way that you have it. And I've heard people describe it, other than like the literal rocket ships that make up like the, our case, or, like make up what people think about entrepreneurship. It's a very hard life. Yet when you talk to the people, especially I think like the 20 somethings that are interested in doing this, right? Like I'm now a part of, I've been spending more time at UNC, and I've been going to their innovation center, their entrepreneurship group,
Hmm.
and talking to them. And you host an event for entrepreneurship, and the room is packed with like young 20 something. And I know those kids are not thinking 5 million closest friends, let's go and build something. They're thinking, Amazon,
Right.
all this. And there's just such a disconnect with that group to try to get them to actually realize it's like, I don't think you know what you're asking for here. I know when I was in my 20 somethings, that's what I wanted, and it was
Yeah.
dumb.
I don't know. I mean, it's like I want people to have like big ambitions and stuff, and that's the thing. It's like I'm talking to a specific demographic of people. I think it's great. Like if you want to go build like some asteroid mining company, by all means do it, right? I advise a bunch of space startups, and I think that's so cool, and it's going to be so lucrative because you're at this inflection point. Maybe we can bring it back to this is like just
Sure.
like everything, there's trends, right? There's trends in VC, and you see it, right? All of a sudden, everything was a blockchain company. Then everything's an AI company. Now everything's going to be a space company. And it's usually those trends hit at the like 5 to 10 years before it seems like it would be commercially viable point. The reason, and this is important when it comes to fundraising, is the question is always why now, right? If you can't tell an investor why they should invest in you now and why this thing doesn't already exist, then you don't really have a good pitch, in my opinion, right?
Well, you
You need
have
a,
a good
a why. Why does it need to exist? What problem does it solve? But why now? Why not in 10 years? Why not 10 years ago? And
No, and that's actually something that Garrett, through his pitch process, does. And he gets really, really clear on that and trying to figure out how to position it. Because fundamentally, you think of like what a company and a startup actually is trying to do. It says, like, look, okay, like I always give this example or try to explain. It's like, okay, imagine a society where the population is static, there's no movement in that. The GDP is static, the people stay as wealthy as they do. Like, imagine, like, like it's everything stays static, and all of a sudden a bunch of companies get started, right? And let's like, capitalism hits and gets started. Eventually, within a certain time period, call it 5 or 10 years, it's just going to be like the big companies are going to remain the big companies. There'll be small niche players to do that. And it's not going to move around a lot, right? Because the fundamentals of what created that society don't change. But we don't live in that world. We live where demographics are constantly changing, GDPs are changing, technology is changing, right? A big thing. And when that change happens, it means the state we're in today is not the optimal state for what we have. There's some lag that sits behind it. So a startup is sitting there and going and looking at, oh, this fundamental change, right? AI, right, is the latest one that people bring up, right? But before that, it's like, oh, cloud computing exists. That's interesting. I don't have to build a server. So now that I have that, who is better, who could be better off? What group is better off? And what needs to be there to help people do that? What needs to happen and do it? And that's the basis for the product, right? Or at least the service. And then you wrap a company around that to say the company is going to build out with this mission, right? That's the statement. The problem is that a lot of startups don't have that, right? They don't do it because you try to, because I know we said with some of them it's really a struggle because we're trying to say, oh, like, well, why now? It's like, oh, but we're a good team. We have this. It's like, well, that's great, but like,
so, Brian,
couldn't
can I
it be
jump in
started?
here? I didn't get
Yeah.
to the point of the why now is important and like what is
Sorry,
the
sorry.
investor reason for asking that question, right? Because you have to understand the deal you're making. You have to understand the incentives at the other side of the table. And a lot of first time founders have never looked into like, what is a VC doing? Right? What a VC does is they go and raise capital from what are called LPs, limited partners. We call VCs, the guy that you meet with is usually a GP. If you're going to close the deal, it's an associate if they don't want to talk to you. And then, so GP is general partner. Associates are the deal seekers. They're the undergrads that just graduated. And, but the GP has a responsibility to his LPs, a fiduciary responsibility to return what he promised in the prospectus starting in year 5 and being finished by year 10 is like usually how it is structured, right? And so if your company doesn't look like it can exit by year 5 or year 10, it's very hard for you to raise capital because it doesn't align with the incentives of the venture capitalist.
Hmm.
So that's the why. Like there's all the other aspects that you were talking about the why now, but if we're talking about fundraising, you have to understand what the person who's giving you the money is incentivized to, why they're incentivized to give you that money. Yeah,
No, no.
sure, they want you to 10x it, right? And that's the other thing. This is a very important fundamental. Anyone, whether it's an angel or a VC, that is doing venture investing knows that they're going to have somewhere around a 10% yield on the companies that come through, right? So if I make 10 bets, give 10 different companies $100,000, five, six of those are going to go to zero. I'm not going to get any of my money back. Maybe two or three are going to give me 1-to-1 my money back, and like one or two, if I'm really lucky, are going to return exponentially, and that is going to carry my entire fund. So every time I make a bet, when I make that bet, I have to believe that this company has the potential to do 100x or 1000x. It's not 10x my money. It has to be a lot more because it's got to cover all the other bets
Got
that
to
I know
cover
I'm
the
going to
entire
lose,
fund.
right? And so that is the other thing that a lot of founders don't get, is unless you can show that there's a market that supports, and that's why the TAM, SAM, SOM slide, right? Total addressable market, segmented, attainable market, and then your yeah, obtainable market, SOM. Um, those slides are important because that's where you're painting the picture of the CAGR on this industry is like this, or we're riding the wave, and it's going to get to the size that's this big, so that I can go like, okay, well, what do budgets for that look like? How many clients do I think you could have? What are comparable companies in that business? Or like in my past experience, will this get large enough to, based on my investment and my percentage? Because the other thing is, an angel or a VC knows that every time you raise additional capital, they're getting squished down, they're getting crammed down. The
Right.
pie is getting bigger, but their slice of that pie, by percentage, is getting smaller. So generally it works out because the pie gets so much bigger. Like, you're not going to raise Series B, Series C, Series D unless you have this explosive growth. But the early stage investors, which is who we're talking about, they're doing the math in their head. Okay, if I put $100,000 in on this round, the company's valuation is whatever, $5 million. They're raising $1 million, so I get, you know, they're selling 20% and I'm buying 10% of that 20%. So I have 2% now. And then it's like, okay, they're going to raise 3 or 4 rounds because they're in hardware and it's going to be forever, like, and each time they raise, I'm going to get diluted by 20%. So what does my percentage look like at their targeted exit valuation based on like what I believe and what they're showing me? And that's how they figure out the calculus of whether you have the potential, not that you're going to, that you have the potential to return enough to make that investment worthwhile.
Interesting.
It's all just a math problem.
So yeah. So let's actually talk about that. So okay, so there's a lot of compelling reasons why not to raise capital, is what I keep hearing. In doing that. It's a very we know this, right? So let's assume you are interested in doing that, though. If for whatever reason you think you're the type of company that wants to do that, or at least you want to take a shot at it. You mentioned an interesting structure with VCs in particular. So angels are an entirely different beast. So let's actually no, let's talk about that. That's probably more relevant.
That's the
So
more material thing.
you're right. That's the thing. So let's talk about it. So let's say I've decided, okay, I know at least I want to raise a pre-seed because I have to do this. And I have a couple companies that I know of that are like, yeah, they need pre-seed capital because they need to test something out in local markets, right? In North Carolina in particular. But they don't know how to do it. So for those groups, what's the actual boots on the ground strategy for, okay, they want to raise 500,000 or 1 million, whatever it is, and do that. What should they be doing if they know they need to go do that? And what's the timeline and time frame they should be thinking about?
Yeah. Okay. So, I'm just gonna give you guys like my full framework, but ideally, I decide tomorrow that I'm going to start this new company and I'm gonna need $1 million, right? Immediately. I'm going into my network. My network's a little different than yours, but no one was without network, right? Like, and if you are, it's not hard to like start building it, right? It might take you a little longer, but in the high growth innovation slash angel slash venture space in any second or third tier city in the country, there's probably less than 100 people you need to know almost everyone that could influence your journey, right? I mean, if you're in Austin, if you're in Boulder, San Francisco, New York, the numbers are a little bit different. But if you're anywhere else, I can almost guarantee you there's less than 100 people that will make or break your ability to raise capital in that city. So figure out who those people are. How can we do that, right? Research and analysis. Business journals write about venture deals, look at the newspapers, who raised capital. Go, if you know the names of the founders in your city, right? You know the names of the company that are startups in your cities, email the founders, ask them for a meet. Say you're an early stage founder who, is trying to learn their way, want to grab some coffee, just to whatever, I'll buy you lunch, right? I mean, it's cheap, $20, but you get someone who's made millions of dollars starting a business in the same path and trajectory you want to give you an hour of their time. Like, that's the best investment you can make. Way better than paying for college. Can guarantee it. So, especially if you do the work. So you start with this research problem. Who do I need to access? Now, once you figure out like what problem, hopefully at this point you already know what problem you're solving, because when you're meeting with these people, you're talking about it. Because every meeting should end with two questions. One, can I put you on my VIP mailing list? Because I want to just continue telling you about my progress. And sometimes I have asks, and maybe you could reply and help me with something in the future. Number two, uh, who should I be talking to? Can you give me two names of people? Would you be willing to introduce me to two other people in our space that might be relevant to where I am in my path? All right. So you got power law growth dynamics in your network. Like that's the game. So from week 0, now it's week 1 or month 1, week 4, month 1, right? If I've already met with 12 people and now I should have 24 incoming recommendations, right? But those initial 12, month 1, I'm writing my first investor newsletter, my VIP newsletter. So I use those interchangeably. VIP newsletter is people who haven't invested but are like capable mentors, potential investors, things like that. And then you have maybe you have like people who are actually investors on that list. Like, you should tag all these people, whether they have capital or don't, or they are angel investors. And you can pick this up in conversation. You can go look on Crunchbase, you can look on AngelList, do the research. And then the last one, so when I write a monthly newsletter, I write for the investors first. When I write to my investors, it is full disclosure. I tell founders that up until the moment you have a signed deal and the money is in your account, you are adversaries with every investor you meet, but it's in a friendly, like, we're playing a game. It's a negotiation. As soon as you take their money, they are your best friend. And they have to be, because if you run out of cash and you haven't raised more capital, the only people that are going to give you money are people who have already invested. People who you have a relationship with that is strong enough that they are willing to put good money after bad to keep you on the path, right? And like, that is like a big eye opener for some folks, because people get adversarial relationships with their investors, and it's stupid because like they have probably a lot of pattern recognition skills. They've dealt with lots of companies like yours. They're also meeting with a lot more people than you. They have a giant network. Like, those are the folks that can find you key hires, can make introductions to people. And this is why you want to feel them out and you want to build that relationship. Not all money is created equal. Just because someone's willing to write you a check doesn't mean you should take it, right? And so before, when you're going through that due diligence process, you get them to soft commit, usually in a pitch, and then they're going to want to see more details to, know that you're not just trying to hustle them. But you should be saying, like, introduce me to founders you've previously invested in. And then you're calling those people and talking about that relationship. And then you're looking at that person's portfolio. Give me the names of, the companies you invested in. You go into the ones that they didn't refer to you and say, hey, what happened? You're looking at the ones that failed. Hey, what happened? Right? Because you want to have an understanding of this person's pattern of behavior before you jump into bed with them. Because once they're on your cap table, they're there probably until you exit, especially in the case that we're talking about. Sometimes if you go on to Series B or later, right, you can buy people off out of your cap table, you can clean it up. But early stage, like, those people are there for the life of the business if you never go on beyond that. And so, do you want the guy who's a jerk being able to beat you up or being able to hold back on signing papers or whatever, right? Like, there's lots of bad things that bad parties who have invested in your company can do to make your life suck for the rest of your startup experience with them. So So anyways, take it back, right? I write for my investors first, and then I redact. So investors get all the bloody details, the successes, the failures, what our economic situation looks like, what our growth looks like, how many customers, how many calls, right? I usually have KPIs in there that show that I'm doing the work. And then we redact all that sensitive stuff and we give like the highlights and maybe some general like growth, and like these are the things we're working on, challenges, and that is what goes out to the VIPs, because again, if you're doing this methodology where we're not raising like a structured priced round with actual VCs, the chances are is you're raising safe notes or something like that, and you're going to do it incrementally in a rolling close, right? And so they're going to come in over time. Obviously, you want to get it done all at once if you can. Um, some angels will make you, like they will hold back until you've hit whatever your target number is for that round, before you close. But anyways, the newsletter that I send out monthly, that is the social contract, and that is how you build relationships. You tell them what you're going to do, and then you do it and tell them you did it. And you just rinse and repeat that. And over 6 months, now they start to trust you. Even if they don't read your newsletter, but it's in their inbox, when you come to them and ask for a meeting and say, hey, we're about to raise capital now. We're putting together a round. We want to raise $1 million. We want to raise $500,000. Are you interested in taking a pitch meeting? Well, they're going to go back if they're actually, worth their salt, and they're going to go read every, email you sent them. And if you have a great history of saying you're going to do something and then doing it, you're a much better bet than someone who doesn't have that history. If you're just a guy they met once at a meetup, 6 months ago, that's a totally different relationship from the investor standpoint than someone who A, had an investor mailing list, B, sent it routinely every month, and C, did the things they said they were going to do month over month. And if they didn't do them, explained why, because X, Y changed. We didn't do this, so we did this instead. Most investors, and I say this as an investor, I put a check in and like I never hear from companies again unless they need more capital. Do I want to give a company that just took my money and like went into the ether more money? No. So this is a ritual that you should maintain throughout all the way to your exit, right? And maybe over time it shifts. Like maybe there's, you achieve a certain stage of maturity and maybe it's a quarterly thing at that point. My best investment, my best performing investment, like clockwork, I get an email quarterly from them. It is a discipline thing. From the investor standpoint, disciplined founders who are smart and do the research and do the work are the ones who have a higher percentage of winning, right? And they understand the value of the relationship, and so they're putting in that effort. So you can spend all this time building product, but that doesn't give me faith that you're actually going to be able to run the business, because I know from being in business, I'm 40 years old, I've been in business for a long time, that people who value relationships do better in business, right? So be that guy. Start building a pipeline. And over time, if every meeting you're having, you're getting introduced to the right people and you're adding people to your mailing list, by the time you go to raise, you might have 1,000 people on your mailing list. Then it starts to become law of large numbers, right? Like I have 1,000 people, I announce I'm going to raise and I say, hey, listen, would you be interested in taking a meeting, or do you know someone whose investment thesis we are a good fit for? Can you make an introduction? If you get 1 or 2 or 3 or 5% response rate, your funnel gets pretty full pretty fast.
Very fast,
So
yes.
it's like hands down. It's like it's the easiest, cheapest thing you can do as a founder, and it is the least commonly actioned item. Even people who have hired me as an advisor and a consultant, and I beat them up week over week, struggle to do this one thing. And if you do it, people invest in you. Literally, dudes will have exits, right? Investors will have exits, and then you have to redeploy that capital for QSBS reasons to get the tax advantages. I have had founders who did listen to me and did write monthly newsletters get like manna from heaven. Hey, would you be interested in $50,000? I need to deploy some capital. I think you're doing great. How many times does the money come to you if you're cold calling people on LinkedIn? It just doesn't happen, right? And so like this is like the one thing that if you take away from this, it's like write an investor newsletter, keep up with it, do it. There's literally SaaS that you can use to like help you manage it. Like I'm friends with these guys at paperstreet.vc. Give them a little plug. That's what at Techstars we
I was
used
about to
that.
say, like, that sounds like a SaaS product, like that just tells you, hey, time to write up what you did this month and send out to your investors, you know?
Totally. And it manages your list for you and it lets you do the thing I was talking about, redacting certain things. They give you a good template for how to use it. If you end up in an accelerator, a lot of accelerators use it. Investors who have a lot of plays use it because it aggregates all the different newsletters for them so they can just keep up to date. So there's the other thing I use all the time is I use the software called Bridge, brdg.app, and that's how I make all my introductions. I know you and Garrett have received introductions from me that way. Um, that allows me, right, to very quickly manage a thing that is usually a time suck, right? I can do those introductions in 30 seconds instead of spending 15 minutes on them. And that becomes valuable, A, if you're an angel, B, if you're a mentor. But even as a founder, I think it's very valuable because it's about reciprocity. All relationship building is about exchange of value. So even if I'm meeting with an investor, I can say, hey, have you heard of my buddy Joe's startup? He's doing this and it's on thesis for you. Would you like an introduction? Right? Oh, have you met so and so? I met the other day. He's another angel investor in this community, but he's new here. Right? Like people are always, there's always the easiest way to exchange value is to make a nice warm introduction. And I don't make sloppy introductions. I make very targeted, very specific. And in my workflow, I say, would you like an introduction to so and so? Because this XYZ. And then what do I do? When it goes to you and you click accept, I say, write in the first person as if you're talking to them, tell them who you are and what you want, and do it in a paragraph, right? And the response rate, I probably get 90 plus percentage people accept those introductions, right? Because they're good introductions with good forwardable emails. Here's the problem we solve. Here's how we solve it. I want to meet with you for 15 minutes to talk about this topic because Clark said you were an expert on it. Accept, right? And then it comes back. So again, it's all a relationship game. The other thing, because that I want to talk about is targeting. Uh, Garrett's father, special operations guy. I have a lot of love in my heart for the soft guys because a lot of the tactics that I use are adopted from my friends who are soft guys who told me how they operated in country. If you were to play this podcast for a guy, like they'd be like, oh yeah, one of the things that we do when I'm doing this research is you figure out who are the key people, right? We started the conversation with that. The next most important thing are who are their lieutenants? Who are the people that report to their lieutenants? You can literally build out a graph of your community. And maybe today you can't get a meeting with Elon Musk, but I bet you can get a meeting with the director of division, where the VP reports directly to Elon, right?
No,
And and so you escalate privilege, right? So when we're targeting high value targets, we find the high value target and we go, how can we access him? When we're looking for Saddam Hussein, who we talk to? Like every butler, every cook, every, like those people were who got rolled up first by Delta Force. And then they said, where's Saddam? Where's Saddam? Where's Saddam? Who do you know who knows Saddam? Right? Like that's the game. You're doing the same thing to attack, but to target the investor, the ideal investor you want.
no, and that's interesting. Is that that was a rule I learned in my early 20s when trying to reach out to people and network with like high value individuals, right, that are out there, or just learning about an industry or learning about some group you don't know anything about. There's the people at the very top, which are very hard to get access to, don't necessarily want more people in their network. They already have too much, right? That's at the very top. But there's this much larger, much broader, and almost as good group that sits right below that first group that are easy to get access to, easy to find, you can have talks to, and you can get, just tons of information. And they're also very accomplished. They're just not as maybe famous is the right term,
And,
right?
and oftentimes they have capital, like they're
That's
one step behind whoever they report to, whoever they're far enough in their career, and they've seen the person you're talking to make difference. And the easiest way to get the high value person to invest is if their buddy's invested, right? So start at the base of the pyramid and work your way up because the true foundation is probably still good mentorship, and they're going to have better information about who you should talk to and who might be interested in the tier above it. So it's just a path, right? It's just do the work, do the research, put together your stack. We call it like your investor funnel. And this is the other thing. don't think about just this round, right? Like you're gonna, as you're doing this research, you're gonna see people who their minimum check size is way too big for you. Okay, doesn't mean you shouldn't introduce yourself to them. You just state very clearly to them, hey, we're raising a pre-seed round. We know that we're below, your check size, and we don't have the metrics you need. But the rest of your thesis, we meet. We wanted to introduce ourselves and talk to you. So when the time's right, we can engage in a deeper conversation. Would you be willing to have a 10-minute call? Sure. And if you're not willing to have a 10-minute call, would you be willing to go on our VIP mailing list, right? And in your CRM, you mark them and you start building that relationship. Every 3 months, every 6 months, you shoot them an email. Hey, just me following up. We talked 3 months ago, blah, blah, blah. By the time you go to actually raise that next round, it might be 2, 3, 4 years later, but now you've talked to them quarterly for 4 years. They're going to recognize your name, right?
Right.
And so this is like stuff that you don't need. It's not fancy. There's no subscriptions. You're not giving away a point of equity to some advisor who offers to introduce you to someone who's not actually going to do shit. Like this is easy stuff, and people just don't do it. People just don't do the work because they're focused on the other part, right? And that makes sense. Like I've built product, I've had to deal with all that. And that's why I say time boxing is key. You just say, I'm going to spend 10% of my week fundraising for the life of this company. That means writing the newsletter, doing the research, taking the coffee meetings. That's 4 hours a week. That's 8 hours a week just doing that stuff because it's getting in the gym. It's doing those reps in the gym. It's not game day, but guess what? The faster, stronger player spent 10% of their time in the gym.
Interesting. Garrett, I haven't heard from you, I think, at all today. I'm curious if you have any.
I mean, this is all great. I don't want, he's the expert. No, as someone that networks a lot, I think this is super important. I mean, that was what I learned trying to raise was that we should have started 6 months beforehand. So all the VCs, speaking of advisors, right? We had 5 for my startup, and one was Brian, and Brian got us our 5 meetings total, which we had. And that's because Brian had a pre-existing network, and that was it. We ran out, we got an offer on one of them, and it wasn't very good. And we were done. It was mid 2022, and the market was going to shit. So
Dying, I actually saw numbers about that this week from the equity. It's basically 2021 there, and then just drop and then flatline. It's been a flat. I mean, again, there's still stuff happening, but Clark, it's like you said, where is it
well, it's
happening?
coming back. So rates are going down. There's a lot of dry powder. So
I was thinking about that, and I'm optimistic. Hope for the best, prepare for the worst. I've already hoped for the best. Now I am in prepare for the worst mode, which is what happens if it's low again. What are we going to do?
they
Right?
have to deploy. They have to deploy at some point.
So
actually, I
Yeah,
wanted to
yeah,
ask
Clark, what do you think?
Clark. Actually,
well, I mean, I already gave you my thesis. I think the game has changed a lot, and I think a lot of the people who have 2020 vintage funds, right, who are, again, they're running out of time to deploy. A lot of them were founders who exited. There was like this glut of like new VCs that went and raised, and they took a lot of money from LPs, and they don't know how to successfully like prospect and find good companies and deploy into those companies. And a lot of LPs are going to lose money, or they're going to get their initial investment back and not get any returns or whatever, right? Like I don't think it's a good deal, but in general, like LPs are retirement funds at a university, and the VC side of it is just a hedge for them. They're putting 1 or 2% of their total assets at play. So I'm less worried about talking about that, but I mean, let's keep talking about founders. We got like 10 minutes left, and I think there's some other things. I've been talking a lot about messaging, communication, marketing, but product is still important. Like product wins games, right? Like, and I think right now we're at this incredible moment, and this is where people get confused about competition. This is another classic mistake of early stage founders. They like Google it and they find out like someone already exists in this market, and they're like, I don't want to build it. The truth is that validates that there's actually a market for the thing you want to build, right? And even if you haven't started building now, I mean, with the AI tools and the capability, like you can just clone an existing SaaS in a matter of weeks and then start adding your special sauce. What makes it different? What is your vertical? Because you want to make investment conversations easier. Okay, yeah, we have all this like build track record of saying you're going to do blah, 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 right? We already talked about that. But what really moves the needle is fucking traction, right? The difference between an idea that sounds good and has an impressive story and pitch deck And an idea that has like 50% of that, but has the growth numbers, like I'll take the growth numbers all day, right? There's a lot of slick looking decks out there and people who are very good orators who can pitch and sell.
Uh,
Um,
It, it, it's kind of funny. We are in a realm that you can win by being very, very, very good at the right thing and being able to do that. Like we are playing a game of extremes here, right? Where it's like you may be missing some things, but you do so well in one realm, like your growth numbers are absolutely insane, or you have solved a problem that like there's a product that I know locally. It's not a startup, but like basically it's like it's an existing company. The two founders came up with this idea, right, to do this, and they hired basically a VP of product to build it out. So it's kind of startup-esque. And it turns out they captured like 25% of their market immediately because they solved a problem no one else did. Deck was okay, right? I'll do it,
right.
but they solved the one problem, and there you go. There's your ticket. They're now on to the next round.
Yeah. Yeah. So, if I believe you have a roadmap to continue on and the capability to execute, and everything else held equal, right? You got four startups that look like that. I'm taking the one that already has sales, that already has a customer list, that's already growing. I mean, because that proves to me execution in some way. Um,
Mhm.
Especially if I go and do my diligence and I call a bunch of those people, both the ones you give me and the ones that are off list, and they all say, "Oh, these guys are great. They solved this thing. It's such a pain. I'm never letting go." Like they have my money until, that's what I used to say about Spotify. I was like, it's the best, $10, $20 a month I spend. Like every time I see that charge come across, I'm like, oh, this is great. I love being able to listen to whatever I want to on demand. This is incredible.
Mhm.
And like if you're really solving a problem for someone, that's the kind of vibes they're left with. They feel that they're getting more from your product than the capital that they're expending to receive it. Like they love it. And so, you know, I spent a lot of time about socializing, but you can't lose that mindset of we have to go build awesome product. And the way you build awesome product is the same way that you raise capital. You go talk to people. You get in the office. You watch them work. You watch your initial customers. Like you ask them, "Hey, can I join a Zoom meeting and watch you use this thing? Can I come to your office and talk to you? Can I watch? I'll give you $100, right, for to sit there and watch you do your thing with my thing." Cool, right? Because then you sit there and you go, oh man, he froze up there. That UI must not be perfect. Or like he ran into this problem. Oh, and that is the difference between like meh product and incredible product that gives us the things that, like I'm happy, take my money, is
Mm.
is getting rid of all the friction, but you don't see the friction in VS Code. You don't see the friction, when you're dog fooding the shit that you designed because it makes sense to you because you build it, right? And so the only way to actually understand how to make your product better and increase your growth numbers in like a product-led sense is frequent contact with your prospects, with your customers. If you're going to give them the product, then watch them use it. Hey, I'll give you, 3 months free if you let me check in, the first day, walk you through it on week one, watch you use it, and whatever. Like, yeah, there's all that, but as an investor, all I care about is paying customers. That's the other thing, right? Like your growth numbers, especially in the angel realm, right? Because you can give anything away for free. I want to see your churn. I want to see your retention. I want to see, number of hours used. Those are the things that matter because I've seen, lots of vacuous books of business that were bought through, pay-per-click ads, where people log in with Google and never come back.
Yeah. Yes, that's true. All right, we got 4 minutes or so. We'll
Probably
see.
probably wrap. Yeah, it's
Yeah,
closing
I think it's
thoughts. I
better
think
because
this has
unfortunately,
been awesome, Clark. This has been really helpful. I think everyone who's listening, we actually got quite a few viewers too. We had like 10 the whole
Cool.
time. So um I think everyone who's listening can take a lot from this. I really do want to double tap though, like networking is your job. I have to tell basically all of our clients this for the most part. But networking is your job. Go to at least one thing a week. If you could just do that, everyone can do that. It's totally feasible. Go to at least one event a week. And there's something you get out of like going to stuff where eventually you're like known in town as a person who does the thing that you do. And that has so many like progressive benefits from it. And you're like, oh yeah, Garrett's a pitch guy. Because I just go to shit all the time. People see me, multiple times a week. It's easy to remember, easy to get referrals, easy to get connected with people. So yeah, I cannot emphasize the importance of everything you said about networking enough.
Yeah, man. Well, thank you for having me, and thanks to our audience for showing up. Great, great to meet everyone. I don't know, virtually. I don't like whatever you say to people in the audience.
Speak
Thank
to
you for
you.
listening.
Speak at
Thank you for
you.
your time.
Thanks, chat.
Thanks, Chad. Yeah, that's it. That's the way I say it. Excellent, Clark. Thank you very much for being here, folks. Thank you very much for joining. We will have another session next week, and we will see you guys then.
Later, y'all.
And the stream has ended. Let me
You have to
kill.
turn the live streaming off on this end too.